Well, hello there. Welcome to With a Gay Twist. We are a bi-weekly podcast hosted by two homosexuals who talk about news and politics, but with a gay twist. I'm Mason Dixon, and I need my handbook for the recently diseased.
And I'm Zach. And Mason, did Frederica ever mention anybody by the name of Jame Gum or a Jamie Gum?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
No.
Then she's probably dead.
She's probably dead with the handbook for the recently deceased, not diseased. No, I am not recently diseased, but I sure feel like it after the last 2 weeks. Okay.
Oh, it's been a tough 2 weeks.
It's been a tough 2 weeks for a number of reasons, and we'll get into some of those reasons today. On today's podcast, we'll be talking about redistricting, the Supreme Court appointments that President Biden is looking at, or rather appointees, and touching on what's happening with the Electoral College and how Congress is looking at making a few changes to the current process for presidential elections, given what's recently been happening with President Trump. And then a little later, we'll be learning about our queer person in history. And Zach, who will you be telling us about today?
I will be telling you about the fabulous Robert Dover.
I can't wait.
It's going to be great.
Gonna be fantastic. Now, I think what we're going to do is we need to start talking a little bit.
So sorry to interrupt you, but first we need to do the intersection interruption. That's right. It's the intersection interruption, where we talk about the intersection between queerness and news and politics. And specifically this week, we're going to be talking about some bullshit that has been going down with states like Florida trying to just ban the word gay.
I'm so tired of feeling like I have a target on my back.
It's pretty bad down there in Florida. I mean, Florida, a state that many have argued we should just cut off and let it float out to sea.
Insert gif of Bugs Bunny with a saw.
Yes, exactly. So, the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, whom I absolutely adore. I would adore for him to go climb up Everest and stay there. He has been working with the Florida House to get a bill through their legislature that would ban discussions in public schools of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Now, I think we should be a little clearer when it comes to saying that DeSantis is working with anybody. Basically, what he does is he walks in and says, listen, you effers, we're going to screw some people over today. Are you ready? Cool. Just sign on the line.
Yeah.
That's how things work in the Florida legislature right now, because every position is held by a Republican at this moment. And I don't mean the seats individually. What I mean is like the majority control of the House,
both
Senate,
chambers of the legislature.
Yes.
The state Supreme Court and the governorship.
And the governor. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so it's pretty bad right now. So this bill, it's officially called the Parental Rights in Education bill. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Bullshit.
Yeah. So it's not law just yet, but they're working tirelessly to turn it into a law. But it's being fast-tracked, and what it's going to do is forbid educators from, quote, encouraging classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity. So here's the thing. That wording is purposefully vague, but mama, the goal is clear. This is an attempt to erase queer people from the classroom in the same way that the current spate of states trying to ban CRT, critical race theory,
which Florida did,
yes, is also trying to just erase people of color from the classroom, and just we're not going to talk about certain things that make white people uncomfortable.
Yeah, like it it's ridiculous what's happening. I mean, whitewashing and conforming narratives to fit the societal heteronormative narrative is just ridiculous at this point. I mean, I can't. It gets me really worked up because I have a child who is special needs, and I already have to fight a huge battle to get the supports that they need in an education setting. And then to top it all off, as a former educator, I also know of others that were my colleagues, and they themselves were not, how can I say this? They were open and honest about who they were and what their identities were. And they were pushing in those environments to be more inclusive of both faculty, staff, and our students, and allowing classrooms to be safe environments. One of the other things that this bill does is it also allows, if not mandate, for teachers to out students to their parents without student consent, which is extremely dangerous. And it was something that I had a full blown like philosophical debate with a colleague of mine at the institution that I was teaching at about whether that is something that we should protect as teachers, whether we're in a position of trust with students that are minors.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Teachers are in a position of trust. A student comes to you, they tell you they are some form of LGBTQIA plus, and now you as a teacher are now required by law to out them to their parents when they may have been coming to you to say, I can't tell my parents because my dad's going to beat the shit out of me. My mom's going to kick me out of the house. I'm going to get disowned.
I literally had people tell me this
Yeah. So
by like either in person or by confidential messaging. And when I say confidential, the messaging that I was getting was still be able to be viewed by their parents. So the student was taking a risk by messaging me through the appropriate platforms that they use to communicate with instructors. Nothing that was said was like able to be hidden from the parents. They have full access to all the platforms that students have access to. They can see all messages that go back and forth. But I had a handful in my classes that came to me and said, this is what I prefer to be called, and I cannot go by this when I'm at home. As in, hint, hint, please do not refer to me as this when you have to call home or if you have to talk to my parents. And that's
it's very dangerous.
It's very dangerous. And this bill creates that environment not only at home, but it rips away the safe haven that school can be for these students. So there was a bill that Florida also passed that requires in post-secondary education, so we're talking about college, institutional levels that are above high school, that they require colleges to exhibit a diverse political environment, I guess would be the right word. I'm at lost words because it gets me so heated. But basically, if the legislature or the governor feels that your institution is too heavy leaning in one direction or the other. Now, this was done by Republicans. This was done by, radical conservatives like DeSantis. So they were looking at saying, oh, post-secondary education institutions are too liberal leaning, but they could rip away funding from those institutions, and that kind of trickles down into the K-12 setting as well. So pairing the idea that now with this don't say gay bill that we're talking about, we can't even talk about gender identity issues. So we can't create those known safe spaces for students that are coming into their own and exploring their own gender identity and need safe individuals and safe spaces to have those open and frank conversations. But they're pairing it with the idea that we can no longer have open dialogue about political opinions and political theories so that we can educate our young people, not indoctrinate, but just educate them in standard political discourse and allow them to express themselves and be able to express as an educator what is and isn't political theory. Like I felt as an educator that I couldn't correct things that my students were saying that were just factually incorrect. And I'm not saying like fact checking people, like literally just a political process that they were talking about. Like the process that they were describing was flawed because they were missing or misquoting some part of a statute. Like I felt that I couldn't discuss that.
There's another really terrible thing that this bill does, which is not only does it, of course, make it a very dangerous situation for queer students, but even for non-queer students, for straight cis students, where not even being able to talk about historical events that include queer people. So if the idea of mentioning someone's sexual orientation is not permitted because now we're quote unquote, pushing it on the kids. We're not going to mention sexual orientation. Okay, well, can you explain to me how you're going to teach a history lesson about, let's say, George Washington, and you mention, well, and George's wife, Martha Washington, yada, 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 yada. Okay, well, we've now said that George is married to a woman and have now implied that he's straight. So we now are talking about sexual orientation. So it's actually impossible to talk about really anyone in any sort of personal capacity without mentioning their sexual orientation. Oh, but it's not really about mentioning the straight people, though. That's not it.
That's silly. Why would straight people make other people uncomfortable?
They don't. So we're just going to get rid of the ones that do make us uncomfortable, and that's the queers.
That's the others. Forget about queerness. We can't talk about anything that is race-based that makes a white person feel ashamed or uncomfortable or embarrassed that they're white.
Stop, you're hurting my white fragility.
Oh my God, my porcelain doll structure is just cracking under the weight of you saying that white people 200 years ago did this. Oh wait, white people 100 years did. Oh wait, white people 50. Oh wait, white people 25. Oh wait, white people last week did this.
Like, for example, the fact that actual Nazis were outside Orlando in broad daylight
with swastikas
and Nazi flags and just out there protesting on the side of the road.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately that's not new in Florida. There's a town called Eatonville, which is actually in the greater Orlando area. And it was of note because Eatonville is a historically black, I don't know if it's considered a township or a city or suburb. It is a historically black area. And they have a very well-known parade. And it was a sort of landmark case that the KKK actually sued the Eatonville Festival Planning Committee, or the town of Eatonville, because they were not allowing them to march in the parade. The KKK was upset that they couldn't march in a parade that was celebrating black and brown people marching through a predominantly historically black and brown community.
Yeah, I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. Oh my God, it's like totally fine. Like, everyone calm down.
Right.
Yeah. So, shit be fucked up and shit.
Yeah. Florida's not new to that.
They're not. And I think we're now going to move on to Mason. What's new?
It's the segment where we talk about the news that caught our eye this week. Yes, and there has been some shit going down. I mean, just a lot that is going down that's affecting all of us across the nation.
We're going to try to do this in a little bit of a different manner. So we really have three things we're going to try to get to tonight.
Yes. There was just so much happening that we were having a hard time picking what was the thing that caught our eye the most, because we kind of were just going cross-eyed in every which direction this week.
It was Sophie's choice, so instead we decided let's just do it all.
It was the worst possible Sophie's choice, and I don't even get nominated for it. Anyway, so we're going to talk about what's going on with midterm elections and what the political landscape is going to look like across the nation. Because right now we're in one of those things that only happens every so often, and that's redistricting, which is going to be our crash course for today. That's right. So today's crash course is going to be on redistricting. And we thought that it would be good to talk through what redistricting actually is, why it happens, so that we kind of understand what's going on with all this gerrymandering, all of these lawsuits that are being lodged at different states, and kind of can just wrap our heads around what it is, why it's important, how it affects us.
Yeah, I keep hearing about this guy named Jerry. Gerrymandering, and I don't know who is he.
He's not a fabulous redhead that goes dancing, screaming about girl power. Okay, this is Jerry with a G, but it's Gerry, and then mandering. And we'll get to him later in just a few minutes. But let's just break down redistricting real quick. So redistricting is done every 10 years following the census. And the census is a very large process. So it actually starts the year before. So it happens every 10 years. So it happens on an even count year. So 2000, 2010, 2020, right? So the most recent one that we had was 2020. That's what it's called, is the 2020 census. However, our work in the field, going out, knocking on doors, actually starts in 2019 for the most recent one. So just so that you're aware, 2020 is when we do the actual counts, but it takes about a year to get those results out and tallied. So you don't get the results until sometime in 2021. So we got the results last year. Part of what the census does is it tracks out the population movement across the nation, and it breaks it down from like nationwide population movement down into your state and your local populations. And that's where our redistricting starts to happen. Is there's this idea of reapportionment, which is where the Congress looks at the census data and says, okay, so looking at where population is, looking at the number of seats that we have in the House, which is 435, we are now going to make sure that we divide up the seats of the House according to the new population density. So going from there, once the census says, okay, this is what all of your states are going to get as far as the seats in the House, the states then have to go through and they have to redraw district lines. And they have to do that to follow specific federal and state guidelines. So the big federal ones are, they have to follow equality standard, which was established in 1964. Then it also has to follow the Voting Rights Act of 1965, or what used to be the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which has been ripped all to hell. And if you would like to find out more on that, you can visit our previous episode 3, where we get all into the Voting Rights Act. But Voting Rights Act Section 2 provides that there cannot be any discrimination based on race, color, or language minority within voting rights, which then carries over into drawing for districts. So, following these, we have to have states go out and redraw these lines. Okay.
And this is a very difficult process, too, because if you think about your home state and you think of the millions of people who live in it, or hundreds of thousands if you live in one of the smaller states, how do you take a map of that state and start drawing lines to sort of evenly divide the state into however many districts you have? How do you do that evenly? And keeping in mind that you want to make sure that you're doing it fairly, so that if you know there are population groups that lean heavily one way or the other, politically, Republican or Democrat, how do you make sure that you're not blocking out to where all of the Democrats get the seats or all the Republicans get the seats? That is where the tricky part comes in, and trying to do it fairly so that you're not favoring one group over the other. And in fact, when you are favoring one group over the other, that is where our mismander comes in, our misgerrymander. Yes, that's gerrymandering, when you're playing the game, cheating the system to favor your party.
But here's the catch. The federal government has said, we don't give a shit about political or partisan gerrymandering. The only gerrymandering that is allowed or able to be heard in federal courts are those that bring up anything that violates Article 1, Section 2, or the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, which is based on race. So, with the partisanship, it was actually in 2019 that the federal courts rejected jurisdiction of those claims of partisan gerrymandering. I won't repeat the year that this happened.
Please do.
2019. So right when the 2020 census work was getting underway, and what also was getting ready to happen at that time.
Let me think about it for a minute. Oh, wait, no, I don't need a minute. I got it. The presidential election.
Right. So it wasn't until 2019 that there were some lawsuits brought up. However, states had already dealt with this issue. So Florida in 2015 and Pennsylvania in 2016 both rejected proposed maps due to unconstitutional intent that they found in the maps leaning too far or too much to the right or to the Republican conservative side. Now, those years are kind of wonky because there was no redistricting going on at that time. Okay, so don't let the years kind of catch you off guard. Redistricting only happens every 10 years following the census. Okay, so it will happen in a 2-year. So 82, 92, 12, 22. Our next redistricting won't happen until 2032 if we're all still here.
Seriously.
Which is still to be seen. So states have already received that information regarding how many seats they have in the House. And I just wanted to quickly run through it because there's some interesting keys here. So we have currently, this would be all of them. So we have 7 states that lost a seat. We have 6 states that gained at least 1 seat, with 1 state being Texas, which gained 2 seats. And then we have 6 states that only have 1 representative in the House. And those states that only have 1 would be Alaska, Delaware, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wyoming. There are some changes, and these are prime examples of why redistricting is needed, is when you have states like California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. They lost a seat. Now they have to account for those previous districts that they had that are no longer in existence. So they have to redraw, make sure that they're following those guidelines, which have a lot of wiggle room. Because, for instance, if a state brings up a proposed map and race was a compelling or a predominant factor in why they drew the districts the way they did, the courts apply strict scrutiny to their justifications, to their arguments, but it is not an automatic rejection, because VRA, the Voting Rights Act, and Article 1, Section 2 clearly prohibit any drawing based on race, color, or language minority. But the Supreme Court has said, no, we will allow race being a predominant factor only if there's a compelling governmental interest. So it's getting interesting. It's something that we need to really be on the lookout. And it's just, this is a year where you need to really be watching for those notices that come from your state board of elections that tell you where your precinct is.
Definitely check out vote.gov. You can make sure that you're registered there, because they also do a lot of voter roll purges. So you can make sure that you're registered, find your polling location, check out to see if there is early voting, check to see if there's mail-in voting. Vote.gov is your friend.
Very much so. And the reason why this came up is because we've had a number of states that had lawsuits that went to their state Supreme Court, and we've had a varying pool of results. So the one that got me this week was North Carolina. I was dumbfounded that North Carolina had a lawsuit that went before the state. The lawsuit claimed that the redistricting was being gerrymandered by Republicans, and the North Carolina Supreme Court said, yeah, you're right. And they rejected the proposed maps.
Yeah. Big deal.
I could not believe that a red state, a very strong red state too, like it normally isn't a swing state, in my opinion. Like it's pretty much red. And it came back and said, yeah, no, we agree. You all were favoring Republicans. Go redraw it. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and it definitely was a win for voting rights. It was a win for democracy.
It was.
We now get to see what happens.
It was, and then we have Alabama.
We know, win some and then lose more.
Win some, lose more. And this went before the Supreme Court in Alabama. It had previously gone, so as all of them that reached the Supreme Court in the states, they went through a lower court. Alabama's lower court decision said, yes, your redrawing was racial gerrymandering. So this case actually could have been held in or heard in federal court, because it was bringing into question direct constitutionality, not state constitution. So federal decisions could have weighed in. But what had happened was that when it went to the Supreme Court, that it said, no, you're good. And basically said that there were errors made by the lower court, and said, yeah, no, it doesn't matter that the lower court believes that there was racial gerrymandering and there's evidence of it. So what situation is in Alabama, what the basis of the lawsuit was that Alabama consists of 7 districts. They have 7 seats in the House. So based off of population demographics, black and brown people make up 27% of the population in Alabama, which means if they were following traditional federal regulations, following what Article 1, Section 2 and VRA says, they would have two Democratic leaning or racially predominant POC leaning districts out of 7.
Which do tend to vote Democrat.
Which tend to vote Democratic historically.
Yes.
But this wasn't related to partisanship. So they weren't looking at parties.
But colloquially.
Yes, very much
Yes.
so. Which is one of the reasons why they did this. So now the proposed map that Supreme Court just gave a stamp of approval for has one district that is predominantly POC voters and 6 districts that are red or that are non-POC dominant.
Yep.
Which basically solidifies that Alabama will go for whatever Republican candidate is sitting for Senate seats or the presidency.
Exactly. This is how it starts.
Oh, and governor. Because remember, these redistricting affect every level election. Every level of election. Okay,
Yeah.
So any of your state elected officials, that is a statewide vote, those are also impacted by the redistricting because you still follow the same precincts. It doesn't get down until you're in your local municipalities that it doesn't have as much of an effect, if any.
I really like what Justice Elena Kagan wrote for that decision. She said that the majority had gone badly astray and said, quote, "It does a disservice to the district court, which meticulously applied this court's long-standing voting rights precedent. And most of all, it does a disservice to black Alabamians who, under that precedent, have had their electoral power diminished in violation of a law that this court once knew to buttress all of American democracy." Work, queen.
We need more like her. Oh, wait. There might be.
There might be. Oh my God, what a segue.
Oh my God. So the other thing that's happening, because this was a 5-4 vote in favor of Alabama, and I'm sorry, this actually went to the U.S. Supreme Court. It did not go to Alabama Supreme Court. It went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it was a 5-4 vote in favor of keeping the current proposed plan. Now, we have this wonderful opportunity now with the liberal powers that be, that we have a Supreme Court justice who has said, "I would like to retire."
Which is lovely. Thank you, Justice Breyer, for taking a stand and saying, yeah, you know what, I'm going to retire now. I'm not going to wait. I wish he would have done it a little earlier in the year as well, but, you know, I'll take it now.
I will take it. Yeah, just thank you. And go enjoy your life with less stress. Don't work another day in your life because you have that wonderful benefit that comes along with the number of years that you have served on the Supreme Court. Take it. So right now, President Biden is looking and vetting potential appointees. He has not officially made any appointments. So in order for this process to happen, what a Supreme Court appointment process is the president selects the appointee or appointees and then submits that to Congress, to the Senate specifically, and then the Senate goes through their own investigation process, which does require FBI investigation as well. That's separate from what the Senate does on their own. But the Senate process includes going through their own interview and investigation, then going to a public hearing where they interview the candidates a second time, and then they submit their recommendation for the appointment. So it's kind of a twofold process. So currently we're at the very beginning of that stage. President Biden has been rumored to be looking at 4 appointees, but we know of 3 of them by name at the current moment. So the first is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and I apologize if I butcher any of these names. Then we have Judge Leandra Kruger, who is a member of the California State Supreme Court. And then we have Judge J. Michelle Childs, who is sitting on the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina.
Now, we've a little bit buried the lead here, and that what's really big about these people...
I was getting there. Don't worry. So I wanted to get their names out there first because I feel like who they are is more important. I think that's getting overshadowed by what that lead is and what the common thread here is, and what has been made into a bigger news story than what should be. So, and I'll explain why I say that is because it's still a big thing. All these ladies are women of color.
Specifically, Black women.
So we've had other women of color. I think, is it just one woman or 2 women of color on Supreme Court? I think it's just one. I think it's just...
It has only been Justice Sotomayor.
Yep. So now we're looking at adding a second woman.
I mean, it would be the first Black woman on the Supreme Court.
On the Supreme Court.
Never had one. Never had one.
Huge. Okay.
But then there's Ted Cruz.
And then there's assholes.
Then there's people like Ted Cruz and Roger Wicker who go on their little hissy fits because they're like, President Biden, he said that he was going to nominate a Black woman. And, I mean, us white men, like, what are we, chopped liver? Like, you've basically told us that we don't matter.
So it's not only that, but they go on to say that what he is doing is blatant practice of discrimination against white men.
Yeah, they can
and
suck
white
my dick.
They can go suck a big raging donkey dick. Okay, so we're losing a white man.
Yeah.
What has historically been the makeup of the Supreme Court?
White men.
White men. Okay.
In fact, out of 115 Supreme Court justices over the last 200 some odd years, 108 have been white men.
Yes.
I'm going to say that again. 108 out of 115 have been white men.
Okay, and then out of that, how many have been Black or brown people?
Justice Sotomayor and Clarence Thomas.
Yes.
Oh, and Thurgood Marshall.
Thank you. So 3. We have 3 people. 3 out of 115. Okay. Now, what's the current makeup? Very heavy on white, right?
Very heavy on the white.
Very heavy on the white. There's
a lot of
cream.
A lot of mayonnaise.
A lot of cream, a lot of mayonnaise. Okay.
Yeah, no whole grain mustard.
Yep.
No ketchup. Definitely no sriracha.
No. So we should update the fucking makeup of the court as we lose seats. Does that mean that white people need to be discriminated against? No. It means that we need to look across the board and go, oh, wow, we have a lot of Black and brown citizens. Maybe their voice should be represented at the highest court.
Yeah.
It's about representation. It's not about discrimination, people.
But here's the thing, though. I mean, what's that phrase that people say all the time? It's like when you're so used to it being your way, equality suddenly feels like some great offense. You know,
Equality
you've
feels
been
like they're taking something away from you.
exactly. Yeah, because you've been having, 90% of the pizza this whole time. You just keep eating 90% of the pizza. And then when they say, could you share it with some others? What if you only had like 75% of the pizza? You're still getting 75% of the pizza, but you're like, oh my God, look, they're taking away my pizza.
And here's the thing. I go back to Boss Baby, the movie, right? There's
Wow.
there's there's this scene where the little baby brother is sitting and talking to Tim, his big brother, and they're talking about the availability of love. And Boss Baby is going through, has one of those like toddler toys that has the beads threaded on the piece of wire and just like sliding them across, saying, I get the parents' love for this, I get the parents' attention for this, and goes through, and by the end of it, there's no love left for Tim. That's at the beginning of the movie. At the end of the movie, finally understand that in the scene where he finally gets his corner office, his brother sent him a box and it was just full of all these beads, so many beads, representing that there is a overabundance and that love is infinite. It's the same idea here. Equality doesn't mean that we're taking things away from you. Equality just means that we're allowing other people's voices to be heard.
Yeah.
It's a insertion and inclusion of other things. It's
Yeah.
not a removal of things that are already there.
Yeah. So, Ted Cruz, go suck a donkey dick.
And take all your friends with you.
Yes, please.
Now, quick mention for something else that's happening that will have potentially a huge impact on the voting procedures for the next presidential election as we're getting closer and closer to 2024.
Oh, don't remind me.
Congress is looking at making some pretty expansive changes to the Electoral College process. They rightly recognized with this most recent election that there might be some things that we want to codify a little clearer. There might be some things that we want to make some edits to.
Mm-hmm. Just put in black and white.
Put
just
in
for
black
safety.
and white.
So
And then
you
just
might
strip some power.
So you might recall that Trump was highly pissed, and still is highly pissed, at Mike Pence for not rejecting the electoral votes from certain states and sending them back to the states. Mike Pence told him, I cannot do that. I do not have the power to do that. As vice president and president of the Senate, I call up the votes. We accept the votes how they've been presented, and that is it.
And he recently did this again in a much more direct public,
For the first time.
for the first time in public, saying that no, he was wrong. I
Yeah.
had no power. The vice president has no power, when he was at a recent was it a rally in Florida, or it was
Something.
some sort of gathering where he was a speaker.
Yeah. And now Trump is now seeing this new political movement on this legislation. He is seeing that as justification for, oh, see, the Democrats are now trying to change this law because Pence could have done it, and they don't want this to happen again, so now they're trying to change it. No, the vice president was never able to do it. It was just a little murky in how the law currently exists. So what Democrats are trying to do now is trying to say, let's just codify this and put it in black and white. No, you cannot do this as vice president.
And it's not just Democrats, though. This is actually gaining some bipartisan support.
That's true.
Granted, not a lot,
No.
but they're getting some. And there's other things going on with the electoral counts within each state. So most notably in Arizona, there was a proposed bill that I believe is still sitting there that's been passed into all 12 of their committees, effectively killing the bill, but still there, where one of the representatives wants to empower the legislature to be able to reject any election results that they want, effectively allowing them to reject their own electoral count within the state prior to submitting it to Congress for certification. So what the electoral count would do is not only codify the powers of the vice president and the limitations that exist there, saying that the vice president has no power to reject the state's electors and ensure that state legislatures cannot appoint electors after election day in an effort to overturn, but it also is going to provide limited judicial review to ensure that electors appointed by the state reflect the popular vote results in the state, enumerate specific and narrow grounds for objections to electors or electoral votes, which is going to limit the ability to just have one person say, I object, which is what we had this past year, is literally 1-2 people stood up, say, I object to the counts in what?
Arizona.
It was Arizona, right? That came up first. So they objected to Arizona, and then they go off. So the current process is literally anyone can object, and then it's an immediate halt to the certification process, and they go into their chambers and deliberate, and then come back after 2 hours.
Yep.
It's going to restrict that ability, and is going to make it more complicated. Not complicated, but it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to get that, because they're going to require additional support. It's not just going to be one person anymore. It's also going to raise, well, that's what I was just saying, was raise the thresholds for Congress to consider objections, and it's going to make it harder to sustain objections without broad support within both chambers of Congress.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty wide sweeping
Yeah,
change.
it's pretty great. It's pretty great, and it's something that we've needed for a while. I mean, if I had my magic wand, this would have already happened, plus we would probably codify some other things, like, a president should probably put all of his finances into a blind trust. Like, a president should turn in his tax returns. You would think that some of these things would be laws, but they're not. They're merely traditions and customs. And we should probably just codify that, considering we had a president really push the envelope on what was allowed, and sometimes push the envelope just right off the table, right into the garbage can.
Yeah, right into the shredder. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, I mean, flush it.
Into the toilet, where he flushed it.
Yeah.
Or ate it.
Or just cut it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about what happened in the Oval Office. Let's move on to what is our favorite segment.
Oh, I love this
Absolutely
segment.
Love this segment, and it's I don't know her.
It's the segment where we highlight a queer person in history we think you should know. That's right, and we think you should know about a Mr. Robert Jeffrey Dover.
I actually know this one, but
you know her?
For those that don't, I'm going to say it anyway. I don't know her.
Well, girl, let me tell you all about her. So, Robert Jeffrey Dover is an American equestrian. Oh, I'm sorry, were you asking me an equestrian?
I'm an equestrian aquarium. I was just raising my hand so that I was noted that I'm here and I'm signing the book.
He's here, he's queer, he is signing the book. Robert Dover is an equestrian. He is an Olympic athlete. He began riding at the age of 13, and he specialized...
I'm sorry, we're talking about horses. I started riding when I started riding horses. Gosh, I really need to learn how to say that. I started riding horses when I was 6.
Okay. Robert began specializing in dressage at 19 and competed in his first Olympics in 1984. Now, here's what's cool. He competed in every Summer Games between 1984 and 2004, winning 4 teams' bronze medals. Yeah. And he also took home a team's bronze in the 1994 World Equestrian Games. So what makes him so special? Well, in 1988, when he competed at the games in Seoul, he became the first openly gay Olympic athlete.
Work queen.
Work queen. Now, granted, there were many queer people who competed in the games before this. None of them were out at the time, though, but dozens of people later did come out who were Olympic athletes. But in 1988, he was the first to go and compete as an out gay person. Big deal, huge deal. Now, let's compare that to the 2020 Summer Games, which, because of COVID, were actually held in 2021 in Tokyo. 185 out queer athletes competed. That is more out athletes than any summer or winter Olympic Games combined.
That's insane.
That's cray-cray. Talk about progress. There's not a lot of moments on this podcast we really can rejoice in something positive happening. This is really great. I mean, Robert Dover was the first in 88, and then look at what has happened. He's still alive to this day. So imagine sitting on the couch watching the Olympic Games in Tokyo last year and seeing 185 out athletes. Look at the doors you opened, Robert. Look at what you did.
It's insane to think what such a simple gesture, not that the gesture wasn't a enormous step. I'm not discrediting the courage, the conviction, and just the difficulty with which he probably made that decision to come out in such a public manner, right? And then to perform on such a not national but global stage. Okay, during the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. We also have to think about the importance of the time.
Yeah, in the middle of the AIDS epidemic.
Yep. Just saying
the
words.
Noive.
Just saying the words is all it took to open this door. To allow, what was it, 185, you said? 185 athletes to be able to perform as themselves, fully as themselves.
It's truly amazing. I'm gooped, gagged, and gobsmacked. Robert Dover, a tip of the hat to you, good sir. That is a queer person in history we think you should know.
And celebrate. That does it here for us on the podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on social media. You can follow the show at With a Gay Twist. You can follow me at Real Mason Dixon.
You can follow me at ZacharyPenn48.
You can also email us at withagaytwist@gmail.com. Make sure you give us a rating on your favorite podcast app so other fabulous queens such as yourself can find us. And remember, being queer is political. Later.
Bye, girl, bye.